I never imagined Christmas could feel so cold inside my own home. My son's words cut deeper than any winter wind ever could. That moment changed everything I thought I knew about love. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. Before we begin, I'd be truly grateful if you'd take a moment to like this video and consider subscribing to the channel. It helps me keep sharing these stories with those who need them most. It was Christmas Eve in Brooklyn, and snowflakes drifted past my apartment window like tiny ghosts of better times. I sat on my worn velvet couch, the same one where I'd rocked my babies to sleep 40 years ago, surrounded by carefully wrapped presents. Each box bore a handwritten tag in my still steady cursive, each bow tied with the precision of someone who believed presentation mattered. The apartment smelled of cinnamon and cloves from the potpourri simmering on the stove, mixed with the butter cookies I'd baked that morning, despite the arthritis flaring in my knuckles. The cookies had taken 3 hours to make. My hands had cramped twice, forcing me to stop and massage the joints, working the stiffness out with gentle circular motions I'd learned from the physical therapist. But I'd pushed through because James had once mentioned, maybe 5 years ago, that he remembered these cookies from his childhood. It was a passing comment, barely a full sentence, but I'd held onto it like a treasure. I'd written the recipe on an index card and tucked it into my recipe box, waiting for the right moment to bring them back. This morning, as I'd cut each star in tree shape, as I'd carefully decorated them with green and red icing, I'd imagined his face when he saw them. Would he remember? Would his eyes light up with recognition? Would he reach for one immediately, like he used to do as a boy, unable to wait? I'd packed a dozen into a special tin for him to take home, already imagining his gratitude. My fingers trembled slightly as I smoothed the red and gold wrapping paper on the last gift. Through the thin walls, I could hear Mrs. Chen's television playing carols, and somewhere below, the Rodriguez family was laughing. Their joy seemed to seep through the floorboards, a reminder of what this evening was supposed to feel like. My own living room felt strangely hollow, despite being full of people. My son James sat on the love seat, his face illuminated by the blue glow of his phone. My daughter Anne perched on the arm of the chair, scrolling through something on her tablet. My husband Robert occupied his usual spot in the recliner, hidden behind the evening newspaper as if it were 1985. I watched them for a moment, these 3 people who were supposed to be my world. James's jaw was tight, that muscle twitching the way it did when he was stressed. His thumb moved in rapid swipes across the screen, probably responding to work emails even on Christmas Eve. Anne had changed her hair again. It was shorter now, highlighted with blonde streaks I hadn't seen when she'd visited 3 weeks ago. Had it been 3 weeks already? Or longer? Robert's hands gripped the newspaper with more force than necessary, the pages crinkling under his grasp. He was hiding, I realized. Not reading, just hiding. When had we become this? 4 people in the same room, each locked in our separate universes, connected by nothing but shared walls and fading memories. The Christmas tree lights blinked in their steady rhythm, reflecting off the framed photos on the mantel. There we were at Coney Island, James gap-toothed and grinning, clutching a stuffed bear I'd won at the ring toss. Anne in her first communion dress, white as fresh snow. Robert and me on our wedding day, young and full of dreams we never quite reached. I stared at that wedding photo longer than the others. I was 23 in that picture, wearing a simple white dress we'd bought on sale from a department store that no longer existed. Robert was 25, his hair thick and dark, his smile wide with confidence. We'd been so sure of everything back then. So certain that love would be enough, that hard work would pay off, that family would be our fortress against the world. We'd recited our vows in a small church in Queens, surrounded by relatives who'd given us kitchen appliances we couldn't afford on our own, and advice we'd been too young to appreciate. Marriage is work, they'd said. Choose each other every day. But somewhere along the way, we'd stopped choosing. Or maybe we'd never really known how. I cleared my throat softly. Can we open gifts together? My voice sounded smaller than I intended, almost apologetic for interrupting their separate worlds. James didn't even look up. His thumbs continued their rapid dance across the screen. Then he rolled his eyes, that gesture I'd seen 1,000 times but had never grown immune to, and said, You didn't get anyone anything worthwhile. The room didn't stop. Anne kept scrolling. Robert turned a page. The Christmas lights kept blinking. But inside me, something cracked like ice on the East River when the first thaw comes too soon. The words hung in the air between us. Worthwhile. I repeated the word silently in my mind, testing its weight, its edges, its capacity to wound. 5 syllables that reduced months of effort. Years of sacrifice, decades of love into something measurable and found wanting. I wanted to respond. I wanted to ask him what he meant, what would qualify as worthwhile in his estimation. But my throat had closed up, and even if I could speak, what would I say? Would I list the price tags? Would I explain the thought behind each gift, the memories attached, the hope that maybe this year, maybe this Christmas they would see me? I sat there, my hands folded in my lap, feeling the weight of those words settle over me like a blanket soaked in cold water. Worthwhile. What did that word even mean anymore? I thought of the cashmere scarf I'd saved 3 months to buy for James, knowing he'd mentioned wanting one last winter. The vintage cookbook for Anne, a first edition I'd found after visiting 6 different bookstores in Manhattan. The new fishing rod for Robert, the expensive one he'd been eyeing in the sporting goods store window. The scarf had cost $247. I knew the exact amount because I'd had to save for it, setting aside $20 here, $30 there, from my modest Social Security check and the small pension from my years at the law firm. $20 meant skipping my hair appointment and touching up the gray myself with drugstore dye. $30 meant walking the 12 blocks to the grocery store instead of taking the bus, even when my knees ached. $40 meant turning the heat down to 65 degrees and wearing 2 sweaters in my own home. But I'd done it. I'd saved the money, visited the department store in Manhattan, asked the young salesperson to show me the cashmere scarves. She'd been kind, probably younger than my own granddaughter, with patience beyond her years as I'd touched each one, testing the softness, comparing the colors. This one, I'd finally said, pointing to a charcoal gray that would match James's winter coat. He'll love it, the girl had said, and I'd wanted so badly to believe her. But more than that, I thought of all the gifts that couldn't be wrapped. The nights I'd stayed up helping James with college applications, my eyes burning from the computer screen's glare. The time I'd driven Anne to Philadelphia in a snowstorm because she'd broken up with her boyfriend and needed me. The 42 years of dinners prepared, lunches packed, clothes washed, tears dried, fears soothed. Memories cascaded through my mind like dominoes falling. I saw myself at 28, working double shifts as a secretary at the law firm downtown while also cleaning offices at night, my feet aching in shoes with worn-down heels. Also, James could have new sneakers for basketball tryouts. I remembered being 35, taking on weekend work at the department store during Christmas season, standing for 8 hours straight in heels, gift wrapping other people's presents while mine for my own children came from the clearance rack. At 42, I'd gone back to school for my accounting certificate, studying at the kitchen table after everyone else had gone to bed, because we needed the higher income my upgraded skills could bring. Those night classes had been brutal. I'd drive to the community college 3 evenings a week, sit in a classroom with students young enough to be my children, and try to stay awake through lectures on tax codes and spreadsheet formulas. My classmates had looked at me with a mixture of pity and curiosity. The middle-aged woman in the back row, squinting at the textbook through reading glasses she'd bought at the drugstore because she couldn't afford real prescription ones. But I'd graduated. 3rd in my class. I still had the certificate somewhere, tucked in a drawer, unframed, because there'd been no celebration, no acknowledgement. Robert had said that's nice when I'd told him. The children hadn't asked about it at all. I'd forgiven Robert's gambling debt when James was 10, the $5,000 he'd lost playing poker with his work buddies, money we'd saved for a down payment on a house. Instead, we'd stayed in this rent-controlled apartment, and I'd told myself it was cozy, intimate, enough. I'd forgiven Anne's stolen credit card when she was 19, the shopping spree that left me $2,000 in the hole and months of extra work to pay it off. She'd cried and promised it would never happen again. And I'd held her and said we all make mistakes. That night with Anne, when she'd confessed what she'd done, had been one of the hardest of my life. She'd come home with shopping bags from stores I couldn't afford to window shop in, her face flushed with excitement, showing me the clothes, the shoes, the makeup. "Look what I got, Mom," she'd said, spinning in a new dress that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Then the credit card statement had arrived. My hands had shaken as I'd opened it, as I'd seen the numbers, as I'd realized what she'd done. When I'd confronted her, she'd collapsed into tears, begging forgiveness, saying she didn't know what had come over her, that she just wanted to feel special, to fit in with her friends who all had money, who all wore expensive things. I'd held her while she cried. I'd stroked her hair. I'd told her it would be okay, that we'd figure it out, that I forgave her, and I had forgiven her. But I'd also worked an extra job for 6 months to pay off that debt. I delivered newspapers at 5 a.m. before my regular shift. Walking through dark streets in winter, my fingers numb even through gloves, tossing papers onto porches while the rest of the world slept. Anne had never asked how I'd paid it off. She'd just moved on, relieved, grateful for a moment, and then forgetful. The request had become a rhythm as familiar as my own heartbeat. "Mom, can you watch the kids this weekend? Just this once." But just this once had become every weekend. "Mom, I'm short on rent. Can you help me out?" Help me out had become cover it entirely. "Mom, we need someone to pick up groceries, drive to the airport, water the plants, feed the cat, make the calls, handle the paperwork, fix the problem, solve the crisis." And always I had said yes. I was the safety net, the backup plan, the person who could be counted on when everyone else had failed or simply couldn't be bothered. I'd worn that role like a coat of honor, believing that this was what love looked like, what family meant, what mothers did. But sitting there on Christmas Eve, surrounded by presents no one seemed excited to receive, watching my family exist in my presence without really seeing me, I felt something new creeping into my chest. It was cold and uncomfortable, like swallowing ice water too fast. Doubt. The terrible, traitorous question. Was I being used? The word felt ugly even in my own mind. I pushed it away, tried to focus on the positive. Tomorrow would be better. Tomorrow they'd see the gifts and remember. Tomorrow they'd appreciate. Tomorrow. But tomorrow had been coming for years now, and it never seemed to arrive. I stood up slowly, my knees protesting, and went to the kitchen. I needed to check on the pot roast, I told myself, though really I just needed to move, to do something with my hands, to escape the weight of that living room for a moment. The kitchen was my sanctuary, the one room in the apartment that was truly mine. I'd organized every drawer, every cabinet with meticulous care. The spices were alphabetized, the pots and pans nested perfectly. The dish towels were folded into precise thirds. This was my domain, the place where I created and nurtured and provided. As I stirred the gravy, I caught my reflection in the darkened window above the sink. When had I gotten so old? The woman looking back at me had gray hair I kept meaning to color, deep lines around her mouth from years of smiling through pain, and eyes that looked tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. I touched my face, feeling the softness of aged skin, the slight tremor that had developed in my left hand over the past year. The tremor was new, something that had started appearing when I was stressed or tired. My doctor had said it was nothing to worry about, just a benign, essential tremor, common in older adults. But it scared me. It was a visible reminder that I was aging, that my body was beginning to fail me in small ways. I was 72 years old. I'd worked my entire adult life. I'd raised 2 children. I'd been a dutiful wife. I'd done everything right, followed all the rules, loved with my whole heart, and somehow I'd ended up here, alone in my kitchen on Christmas Eve, being told my gifts weren't worthwhile. I opened the oven and pulled out the pot roast. The meat was perfect, falling off the bone, surrounded by carrots and potatoes that had caramelized in the juices. The smell filled the kitchen, rich and comforting. I'd made this same pot roast dozens of times. Hundreds, maybe. It had been Robert's mother's recipe, handwritten on a stained index card that I'd laminated to preserve it. In the early years of our marriage, Robert used to come into the kitchen when I made this roast. He'd wrap his arms around my waist from behind, kiss my neck, tell me it smelled delicious. When had he stopped doing that? When had we stopped touching each other, except in accidental brushes in the hallway? That night, after everyone had retreated to their separate corners and guest rooms, I sat in my bedroom with a cup of tea grown cold in my hands. On my nightstand sat a photograph from 30 years ago. James and Anne were small then, maybe 7 and 5, wearing matching red sweaters I'd knitted myself. They were laughing, their arms around each other, and I was kneeling behind them, my hands on their shoulders, my smile wide and genuine. We'd been poor then, poorer than now, living on Robert's modest salary and my part-time wages. But we'd been happy. Or had we? Maybe I was just remembering it wrong, painting the past in colors brighter than they'd really been. I picked up the photo and studied it closely, trying to find the moment when things had changed, when love had become transaction, when giving had become expected rather than appreciated. But there was no single moment, no clear line. It had happened slowly, imperceptibly, like the way the sun sets. 1 minute there's light, and then you look up and it's dark, and you can't say exactly when the change occurred. I set the photo face down on the nightstand. I couldn't look at those smiling faces anymore. Not tonight. My birthday came 12 days after Christmas, January 3rd, a date that always felt anticlimactic, squeezed between holiday celebrations when everyone was exhausted and broke and eager to forget about gifts and gatherings. I'd never minded much. A card was enough, a phone call, even just a text message saying they remembered. But January 3rd came and went in silence. I woke at 7, the winter sun barely cresting the buildings across the street, casting long shadows through my bedroom. I lay there for a while, listening to the radiator clank and hiss, waiting for my phone to buzz on the nightstand. At 8, I got up and made coffee. At 9, I checked my phone. No messages. At 10, I told myself they were sleeping in. At 11, I wondered if they'd forgotten. By noon, I knew they had. The knowing settled over me gradually, like snow accumulating on a windowsill. First a few flakes. Maybe they're busy. Then a light dusting. They'll remember later. Finally, a heavy blanket. They've forgotten. They don't care. You don't matter. I'd made myself a simple breakfast. Toast with butter, a soft-boiled egg, a grapefruit half. I ate methodically, tasting nothing, going through the motions because it was what you did. You got up, you ate, you continued. I'd spent 72 years continuing, and I would continue today too. I spent the afternoon at the public library, my refuge since childhood. I walked among the stacks, running my fingers along the spines of books, finding comfort in their solid presence. I checked out a mystery novel and a cookbook, made small talk with the librarian who knew me by name, and pretended I had somewhere to be, someone waiting for me. "Happy New Year, Eleanor," the librarian Marcus had said. He was a kind man in his 40s, always gentle with the elderly patrons, always patient when we fumbled with the computerized checkout system. "Thank you, Marcus. Same to you." "Any special plans for the day?" he'd asked, and I could tell he was just being polite, filling the silence, not really expecting an interesting answer. "Oh, just a quiet day at home," I'd said, smiling that smile I'd perfected over the years. The one that said everything's fine, I'm fine, don't worry about me. I like to keep things low-key. "That sounds nice," he'd said, and we'd both participated in this little dance of social niceties, both knowing I was lying, both pretending we didn't know. When I got home at 4, there was a notification on my phone. But it wasn't a birthday wish. It was a text from Anne in a group chat that included James but not me. I'd only seen it because she'd accidentally tagged me for a split second, before removing me. "Last night was amazing. Can't believe we pulled off such a great party." My hands went cold. Party? What party? I scrolled through my other apps with the determination of a detective, my heart pounding. On James's social media, barely hidden, were photos from the night before. A party. At his place in Manhattan. There was Robert, holding a beer and laughing. There was Anne, arms around her brother. There were friends I recognized, neighbors, even my own sister Carol, who lived in Queens. Everyone had been invited. Everyone except me. I sat down hard on the kitchen chair. The room spun slightly. I gripped the edge of the table, staring at those photos, zooming in on faces, looking for some explanation, some reason that would make this okay. But there was none. This wasn't an oversight. This was intentional, deliberate. They'd planned a party, a whole gathering, and decided I shouldn't be there. My sister Carol was in 3 of the photos. Carol, who I'd helped through her divorce 10 years ago, who'd stayed in my apartment for 6 weeks while she got back on her feet, who I'd loaned $3,000 to when she couldn't make her rent. Carol, who called me every Sunday morning, who knew January 3rd was my birthday, who'd never once forgotten in 72 years. Except this year. This year she'd gone to a party thrown by my children and said nothing. Had she asked about me? Had she wondered why I wasn't there? Or had she been relieved, glad for a celebration without the burden of old Eleanor and her neediness? I found more evidence in the trash. I'd taken out the recycling that morning and hadn't noticed. But now I looked closer. There, crumpled beneath coffee grounds and orange peels, was an invitation. Printed on cardstock. Elegant font. Join us for a New Year's celebration. The date was January 2nd, my birthday eve. At the bottom, in what looked like James's handwriting, someone had scratched out a name. The ink had bled, but I could still make out the letters. My name. They'd printed an invitation for me, then decided against it. Not even at the last minute. This had been planned, discussed, agreed upon. They'd all decided collectively that I didn't belong at this celebration. I smoothed out the invitation on my kitchen table, pressing it flat, staring at my crossed-out name. The paper was expensive, thick, and textured. They'd spent money on these invitations. They'd chosen a design, approved the wording, sent them out weeks in advance. And at some point in that process, someone, James, probably, had picked up a pen and drawn a line through my name. Had they debated it? Had there been a conversation? Should we invite Mom? No, let's not. Had it been that simple, that casual? Or had it been more insidious, more calculated? If we invite Mom, she'll want to help. She'll take over. She'll make it about her. The cup of tea I'd been holding slipped from my fingers. I watched it fall as if in slow motion, watched it hit the tile floor, watched it shatter into a dozen pieces, watched the brown liquid spread across the white tiles like a stain. I didn't move to clean it up. I just sat there, staring at the broken pieces, feeling the sharp sting of tears that I'd been holding back for months, maybe years, finally breaking free. I cried without sound. It was a skill I'd developed long ago, the ability to weep while keeping perfectly quiet so as not to disturb anyone, not to be a burden, not to make my pain anyone else's problem. My shoulders shook, my chest heaved, but I made no noise, just like always, silent in my suffering, invisible in my grief. The tears came in waves, each one crashing over me with renewed force. I cried for the birthday that no one remembered. I cried for the party I wasn't invited to. I cried for the years of sacrifice that had gone unnoticed. I cried for the young woman in the wedding photo who'd believed so deeply in family, in love, in the power of giving. I cried for the mother who'd thought she was building something lasting, something beautiful, only to discover she'd been building a house of cards that had finally collapsed. After the tears stopped, I sat in the stillness of my kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of my shattered cup and my shattered illusions. The winter afternoon light faded to dusk, and I didn't turn on the lamps. I sat in the growing darkness and felt something inside me shift, not breaking, like the cup, but hardening, crystallizing, becoming something new. I got up slowly and walked to the hallway closet where I kept the photo albums. 3 large albums, leather-bound, carefully maintained. I'd spent hours organizing these photos, writing captions in my neat handwriting, preserving memories. I pulled them down and carried them to my bedroom. One by one, I removed them from the shelves. I opened the first album and looked at the pictures. James's first birthday, Anne's kindergarten graduation, family vacations to the Jersey Shore, Christmases past, all of us smiling, all of us together. There was a photo of James's 5th birthday party. He was wearing a paper crown I'd made, his face covered in chocolate cake, grinning so wide his eyes were nearly closed. I'd thrown that party in this very apartment, inviting 12 of his kindergarten classmates. I'd made the cake myself, an elaborate train engine that had taken me 3 days to construct and decorate. I'd planned games, assembled goodie bags, spent money we didn't have because I wanted him to feel special, to have memories he'd treasure. Did he remember that party? Did any of those memories matter to him now? I closed the album. I stacked all 3 on the shelf in my closet, spine in, so I couldn't see the labels. I closed the closet door. I couldn't look at those faces right now, couldn't bear the weight of those memories, the evidence of a love that felt increasingly one-sided. Then I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at my hands. These hands had changed thousands of diapers, prepared countless meals, signed permission slips, braided hair, buttoned coats, wiped tears, applauded achievements. These hands had worked 2 jobs, scrubbed floors, typed letters, counted money, given everything. And now these hands were shaking and I couldn't make them stop. For the first time in my 72 years, a small voice inside me whispered, "Say no." It was barely audible, easily ignored, but it was there. And I heard it. The confrontation came faster than I expected. 3 days after my forgotten birthday, James called. Not to apologize, not to wish me belated happiness, but to ask for money. Again. "Hey, Mom," his voice came through the phone, casual, entitled. "I'm in a bit of a bind. Car needs new brakes. Can you spot me about $800? I was standing at my kitchen counter, the same counter where I'd discovered the discarded invitation. The morning sun streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes in the air. I watched them float suspended, going nowhere. $800, I repeated slowly. "Yeah, I know it's a lot, but you know how expensive car repairs are. I'll pay you back. Promise." He'd made that promise before. Dozens of times, hundreds maybe. "I'll pay you back." But he never did, and I never asked. That was our unspoken agreement. I gave, he took. We pretended it was a loan. "Mom, you there?" I took a breath. That little voice was louder now, insistent. "No." Silence on the other end. Then, "What?" "No," I said again. The word felt strange on my tongue, foreign and powerful. "I'm not giving you money for car repairs." "Are you serious right now?" His tone shifted from casual to irritated in an instant. "It's my brakes, Mom. This is important." "Then you'll find another way to pay for it." "What's gotten into you? Since when do you refuse to help your own son?" "Since you threw a party and scratched my name off the invitation," I thought. "Since you forgot my birthday. Since you told me my gifts weren't worthwhile. Since I realized I've been buying love instead of receiving it." But I didn't say any of that. I just repeated, "No." He hung up without saying goodbye. The dial tone buzzed in my ear like an angry wasp. I set the phone down carefully on the counter and realized my hands had stopped shaking. For the first time in days, they were steady. Anne called an hour later. The coordination was obvious. They'd discussed this, strategized. "Mom, James told me you refused to help him with his car. What's going on? Are you okay?" "I'm fine." "You don't sound fine. You sound different. Is something wrong? Are you mad about something?" "I'm not mad," I said, and it was true. I wasn't mad. I was something else. Something I didn't have a name for yet. I'm just not giving him money. But he needs it. His brakes are dangerous. Then he needs to handle it himself. He's a grown man with a job. "Mom, this isn't like you." "Maybe it should be." She tried a different tactic, her voice softening, taking on that wheedling tone she'd used since childhood. "Did we do something to upset you? Is this about Christmas? I know James was rude about the gifts, but you know how he is. He didn't mean anything by it, didn't he? You're being dramatic." There it was. The dismissal, the minimizing. I was being dramatic. I was overreacting. I was the problem. Not them. Never them. "I have to go," I said. "Mom, wait." I hung up. Then I turned off my phone. The silence in my apartment was profound. For the first time in what felt like forever, no one could reach me. No one could ask me for anything. No one could make me feel small or used or invisible. I was alone, But I was free. I put on my coat, the long wool one I'd bought at a thrift store years ago but still kept in good condition. I wrapped a scarf around my neck, pulled on my gloves, and walked out into the January cold. Brooklyn stretched before me, the sidewalks dusted with old snow, the sky a pale winter blue. I walked without destination, letting my feet carry me wherever they wanted to go. The cold air stung my cheeks and filled my lungs. I walked past the bodega on the corner where I bought my morning coffee, past the elementary school where James and Anne had learned to read, past the park where we'd spent countless afternoons on the swings and slides. Everything was familiar. Every street corner held a memory, but today it all looked different. Like I was seeing it for the first time, or perhaps like I was seeing it for the last time. I ended up in Prospect Park, watching ducks paddle in the partially frozen lake. I sat on a bench and breathed in the cold air, feeling it fill my lungs, sharp and clean. A jogger passed. A woman walked by with a stroller. Life continued around me, indifferent to my small personal revolution, and somehow, that was comforting. The world didn't need me to be useful. It would keep turning whether I said yes or no. That night, I slept better than I had in years. I didn't wake at 3 a.m. wondering if I'd done enough, given enough, loved enough. I didn't lie awake making mental lists of tasks I needed to complete, people I needed to please, problems I needed to solve. I just slept. Deep and dreamless and peaceful. Over the next few days, my phone stayed off. I knew there would be messages waiting, voicemails, texts, probably emails too. But I wasn't ready to face them yet. Instead, I focused on small things. I reorganized my kitchen cabinets. I finished the mystery novel from the library. I made soup just for myself, a small batch. Not the enormous pots I usually prepared to send home with James and Anne. On the 4th day, there was a knock at my door. I looked through the peephole and saw my neighbor, Mrs. Katz, holding a covered dish. I opened the door. "I made too much brisket," she said, which we both knew was a lie. Mrs. Katz never made too much of anything. "Thought you might like some." "That's very kind," I said, accepting the warm dish. She studied my face with her sharp brown eyes that had seen 8 decades of life and knew how to read pain in another person. "You look tired, dear. Everything all right?" It was such a simple question, asked with such genuine concern, that I felt my eyes start to water. When was the last time someone had asked if I was all right and actually wanted to know the answer? "I'm managing," I said. "Managing isn't the same as all right." She patted my arm. "I'm in 4C if you need to talk. Or if you just need to sit quietly with someone. Sometimes that's enough." After she left, I stood in my doorway holding the brisket, feeling the warmth seep through the dish into my hands. Such a small kindness, such a simple gesture. But it meant more to me in that moment than all the obligatory holiday gifts and forced family gatherings combined. Mrs. Katz didn't need me for anything. She wasn't asking for favors or money or my time. She was just offering comfort, freely given, with no strings attached. I couldn't remember the last time my own family had done the same. I ate the brisket slowly that evening, savoring each bite, and I thought about the difference between love and obligation, between giving and being taken from, between family by blood and family by choice. The messages, when I finally listened to them, were worse than I'd expected. James had called 6 times, his tone progressing from irritation to anger to what sounded like genuine panic. "Mom, what the hell? Why aren't you answering? Did something happen? Call me back." Anne had sent 14 texts, starting with concern and ending with accusation. "Are you really going to ignore us? This is childish. We're your family." Robert, predictably, had left one voicemail. "Your children are worried. Turn on your phone." Your children. Not our children. Not his children, too. Your children, as if they were solely my responsibility. My problem to solve. But it was the last message that made me sit down hard on my couch. It was from James, time-stamped at 2 a.m. His voice was thick with something, alcohol maybe, or tears. "You know what, Mom? Fine. If you want to be selfish, be selfish. We've been carrying you for years anyway. You think we need you? We don't. We're just nice enough to include you. But if you want to be alone, be alone. See how that works out for you. I played it back 3 times, listening carefully, letting the poison sink in. Carrying me? Including me out of niceness? I thought of every sacrifice, every dollar, every sleepless night. I thought of the money I'd given him just last year. $5,000 for his investment opportunity that had gone nowhere. I thought of the weekends I'd babysat Anne's kids so she could go on vacation. I thought of the dinners I'd cooked, the gifts I'd given, the love I'd poured out like water from an endless well. And in return, they thought they were carrying me. I saved the message. I wasn't sure why. Maybe as evidence, maybe as a reminder, maybe just to prove to myself that I hadn't imagined the cruelty. The family dinner happened 2 weeks later. It wasn't planned as a confrontation, at least not by me. Anne had sent a group text, this time making sure to include me, announcing a family meeting at her place in Park Slope. "We need to talk about Mom's behavior," she'd written, as if I weren't in the chat, as if I were a problem to be discussed rather than a person who might have feelings. I almost didn't go. I sat in my apartment on Sunday afternoon, staring at my coat on the hook, debating. The easy thing would be to stay home, to avoid the conflict, to let things fade back to normal. But that little voice that had whispered "say no" was speaking louder now, and it was asking a different question. What is normal worth? I went. I took the subway to Park Slope, walked the familiar route to Anne's brownstone, the one I'd helped with the down payment on, though she'd never quite acknowledged that. I climbed the steps and rang the doorbell, feeling my heart pound against my ribs. Anne opened the door. Behind her, I could see James on the couch, Robert in the armchair. A tribunal. I'd walked into my own trial. "Come in, Mom," Anne said. Her voice artificially bright, the tone she used when she was about to say something difficult and wanted to pretend it was easy. I sat on the chair they'd left for me, clearly the hot seat, positioned so they could all look at me at once. No one offered me water. No one asked about my ride over. They just stared. James spoke first. "So we wanted to talk about what's been going on with you." "What's been going on with me?" I repeated flatly. "The money thing, the ignoring our calls, turning off your phone, this attitude you've developed." Attitude. See? Right there. That tone. It's not like you. "Maybe," I said slowly, carefully. "You don't know me as well as you think you do." Anne jumped in, playing good cop. "Mom, we're worried about you. This change is so sudden. Are you depressed? Do you need to see someone? There's no shame in getting help." "I'm not depressed. I'm awake." "Awake to what?" James's voice was rising. "The fact that your family needs you sometimes? That's what families do. They help each other." "Do they?" I looked at each of them in turn. "Tell me, when was the last time any of you helped me?" Silence. Robert shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the first sign that he was even paying attention. "We're here for you all the time," Anne protested. "Are you? When was my last birthday?" More silence. Anne looked at James. James looked at his phone. "January 3rd, I said. "It was 17 days ago. Not one of you remembered." "We've been busy," James muttered. "Too busy to send a text. Too busy for a phone call. But not too busy to throw a party and make sure I wasn't invited?" Anne's face flushed. "That wasn't about you." "Then what was it about?" "We just wanted to have a night without..." She trailed off. "Without me," I finished for her. "A night without your mother." I found the invitation, Anne. In the trash. With my name scratched out. "Mom, you're taking this the wrong way." "What's the right way to take it?" James stood up, his face red. "You know what? This is exactly why we didn't invite you. Because you make everything about you. You play the victim. You guilt trip us. We're allowed to have our own lives without you constantly hovering." Each word landed like a physical blow, but I didn't flinch. I'd been hit before, with words and with silence, and I'd survived. I could survive this too. "Hovering?" I said quietly. "Is that what you call it when I drop everything to babysit? When I send money I can barely afford? When I spend months hunting for the perfect gift?" My voice was steady, but my hands were gripping the arms of the chair so hard my knuckles had gone white. I'm not hovering, James. I'm being useful. That's what you've taught me to be. That's the only role you've left me. Robert finally spoke. You're being unfair to the kids. They have their own lives, their own problems. They can't be expected to cater to your every emotional need. I turned to look at my husband. We'd been married for 44 years, and in that moment, I barely recognized him. My every emotional need, I repeated. I asked them to remember my birthday, Robert. I wanted them to acknowledge that I exist. That's not an emotional need. That's basic human decency. You're right, I said quietly. You are allowed to have your own lives, and I'm allowed to have mine. What's that supposed to mean? Anne asked. I stood up. From my purse, I pulled out a folder. Inside was a letter I'd written, copies for each of them. I'd worked on it for days, choosing every word carefully. This means I'm done. Done with the loans I know you'll never repay. Done with babysitting so you can take trips. Done with being your backup plan. Done with buying your love. You're not buying our love, Anne said, but her voice was uncertain. Then what would you call it? I give you money. I give you time. I give you everything I have. And in return, I get forgotten birthdays and scratched out invitations and lectures about my attitude. I placed the letters on the coffee table. These are for you. Take them or don't. But I'm done explaining myself. James picked up his letter, skimmed it, his face going from red to pale. You're cutting us off? Financially. I'm setting boundaries. This is insane. You can't just abandon your family. I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm simply stopping the pattern we've fallen into, the one where I give and you take and nobody questions if it's fair or sustainable or even healthy. Robert spoke for the first time. This is your mother talking. He said it like an accusation, like I'd been possessed by someone else. Yes, I agreed. It is. Maybe you should listen to her. I walked toward the door. Anne grabbed my arm. Mom, please, don't leave like this. We can talk about this. We can work it out. We've been talking. You've been talking at me, about me, around me, but you haven't been listening, and I'm tired of repeating myself. If you walk out that door, don't expect us to come running after you, James said. I turned to look at him. My son. The baby I'd held, the child I'd protected, the young man I'd sacrificed for. And I said with a clarity that surprised even me, I don't. I left. I walked down those brownstone steps out into the cold February air, and I didn't look back. My legs were shaking, my heart was racing, but I kept walking. I walked all the way to the subway, rode it back to Brooklyn, climbed the stairs to my apartment, and only then did I let myself sit down, let myself feel the weight of what I'd just done. I'd just walked away from my family. Or maybe they'd walked away from me years ago and I was just now noticing. I thought it was over. I really did. I thought the confrontation at Anne's house was the climax, the final showdown, the end of the story. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I ran into my sister Carol at the grocery store. She was in the produce section, examining avocados with the concentration of a surgeon. When she saw me, her face did something strange. A flicker of guilt, quickly masked by forced cheer. "Oh, hi," she said too brightly. "I was going to call you." "Were you?" "Yeah, I've been meaning to." She trailed off, realizing how hollow the words sounded. We stood there among the vegetables, two sisters who'd once been close, now strangers connected only by blood and old memories. "I saw you at the party," I said. "James's party. The one I wasn't invited to." Carol's face crumpled. "I'm sorry. I should have said something. I should have told them it was wrong." "But you didn't." "No," she admitted. "I didn't. I told myself it wasn't my business, that it was between you and your kids. But the truth is, I was a coward." At least she was honest. That was more than my children had given me. "They're telling people I'm abandoning them," Carol said quietly. "Anne's been on social media. She wrote this long post about how you've cut them off, how you're choosing to be alone, how they've tried to reach out but you won't respond." People are commenting, taking sides. Some defending you, some defending them. It's become this whole thing. I felt my chest tighten. Of course they had. Of course they'd taken this private family matter and made it public, painted themselves as victims, twisted the narrative. It was a final manipulation, a last attempt to make me the villain. I wanted you to know, Carol continued, before you see it yourself. And I wanted to say I'm sorry for going to that party, for not standing up for you, for believing their version of events without asking for yours. I thanked her. What else could I do? Her apology couldn't undo the damage, but at least it was something. At least someone was willing to acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the problem. I went home and, against my better judgment, looked at Anne's social media. There it was. A long, emotional post about how heartbreaking it was to have a parent who chose isolation over family, who refused help, who punished her children for having their own lives. The comments were a mix of support and criticism, strangers weighing in on a situation they knew nothing about. But worse than the post itself was what I found when I dug deeper. Screenshots Anne had shared in a private group that someone had leaked. Messages between her and James from months ago, long before my supposed abandonment, long before Christmas. Messages planning how to handle me, how to keep me at arm's length while still accessing my bank account, how to manage Mom's expectations. They'd been planning this, the exclusion, the distance, the narrative. I wasn't having a breakdown. I wasn't suddenly becoming difficult. I was responding to a pattern they'd deliberately created. I sat on my couch, my laptop open, staring at these messages, these cold calculations of my worth. And I felt something I'd never felt toward my children before. Not anger, exactly. Not even hurt. It was something colder. It was acceptance. They didn't love me. Not really. Not the way I'd loved them. Maybe they never had. Maybe I'd been fooling myself for 72 years, believing that the bond between mother and child was unbreakable. That blood meant something beyond biology. Maybe I'd been wrong. I closed the laptop. I didn't respond to the post. I didn't defend myself. I didn't try to set the record straight. Because I realized something important. I didn't need to. The people who mattered, the people who truly knew me, wouldn't believe Anne's version. And the people who did believe it, they didn't matter. The next morning, I received a letter. Not an email, not a text, but an actual letter, handwritten, slipped under my door. It was from Mrs. Katz. Dear neighbor, it began. I know it's not my place, but I wanted to tell you something. I've lived a long life. I've seen a lot. And one thing I've learned is this. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is walk away from people who treat us poorly, even if, especially if, those people are family. You don't owe anyone your peace of mind, not even your children. I hope you're doing well. I'm here if you need me. Your friend, Ruth Katz. I read it 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and put it in my nightstand drawer next to the photo I'd turned face down. Ruth Katz. My neighbor of 15 years whom I'd exchanged pleasantries with but never really known, had seen me more clearly in these past weeks than my own family had in a lifetime. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in decades. I went to a paint supply store in downtown Brooklyn. I wandered the aisles, running my fingers over brushes and canvases, breathing in the smell of linseed oil and turpentine. Before I'd had children, before I'd become a wife and mother and caretaker, I'd painted. Nothing professional, nothing special. Just simple watercolors and sketches, a way to see the world, a way to express something I couldn't put into words. I'd given it up when James was born. No time, no money, no space for hobbies when there were diapers to change and bills to pay. I'd told myself I'd come back to it someday. Someday when the kids were older, someday when there was more time, but someday never came. Until now. I bought a small watercolor set, a pad of paper, 3 brushes. It cost $47, money I would have once agonized over spending on myself. But I didn't hesitate. I paid, took my bag, and walked home with a lightness in my step I hadn't felt in years. That evening, I set up at my kitchen table. I mixed colors, Tested the brushes, made experimental strokes. I was rusty, terribly so. My hands didn't remember the movements. My eyes couldn't quite capture what I wanted to see. But it didn't matter, because I was doing something for myself. Something that brought me joy. Something that had nothing to do with being useful or needed or good. I painted until midnight, losing myself in the simple act of creation. When I finally stopped, exhausted and happy, I looked at what I'd made. It was terrible. Objectively, artistically terrible. The colors were muddy, the proportions were off, the whole composition was a mess. And I loved it, because it was mine. Over the following weeks, I began to build a new life. Not a replacement for the old one, but something different. Something chosen rather than inherited. I joined a community center painting class on Tuesday evenings. I reconnected with Maria, a friend from my secretary days who I'd lost touch with when family obligations had consumed all my time. We met for coffee, walked through the Brooklyn Botanical Gardens, talked about books and politics and memories. She'd never had children, had chosen a different path, and I found myself envying her freedom, even as I still loved the children I'd raised, complicated as that love had become. I volunteered at the public library on Thursday mornings, shelving books and helping patrons find what they needed. It was work. Yes, but work I chose, work that ended when I wanted it to, work that didn't come with guilt or obligation or the weight of unpayable debts. I spoke to Mrs. Katz more often. We developed a routine, tea on Sunday afternoons, sitting in her apartment or mine, talking or not talking, just existing in comfortable companionship. She told me about her late husband, about the daughter who lived in California and called once a month, about the grandchildren she saw once a year. She didn't sugarcoat the loneliness of aging, but she also didn't wallow in it. She'd made peace with her life, the good and the bad, and she was teaching me to do the same. And slowly, imperceptibly, I began to change. Not in dramatic ways, not in ways anyone else might notice, but I felt it, in the way I stood a little straighter, in the way my hands stopped shaking, in the way I could look at myself in the mirror without feeling shame or inadequacy. I was 72 years old, and I was learning who I was outside of being someone's mother, someone's wife, someone's solution to every problem. 3 months after the confrontation at Anne's house, she showed up at my door, alone. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was getting ready to meet Maria for a walk. When I opened the door and saw my daughter standing there, I felt my body tense, preparing for attack. But Anne looked different, smaller somehow, less certain. Her eyes were red, like she'd been crying. "Can I come in?" she asked. I considered saying no. I had plans. I had boundaries now, but I was also curious. So I stepped aside and let her enter. We sat in my living room, the same room where we'd had Christmas, where she'd scrolled through her tablet while I'd asked to open gifts together. She looked around like she was seeing it for the first time. Maybe she was. "I read your letter," she said. "The one you left at my house. I've read it about 50 times now." I waited. I didn't help her, didn't make this easier. She'd come here for a reason. She could find the words herself. "You were right," she said finally, "about a lot of it. We did take you for granted. We did treat you like a bank account instead of a person. We did forget your birthday. And the party." God, Mom, the party. I don't know what we were thinking. Or maybe I do know, and that's worse. We were thinking you wouldn't find out. We were thinking it didn't matter. "It mattered," I said quietly. I know it did. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She was crying now, real tears, not the manipulative kind I'd seen her use to get what she wanted since she was 5 years old. These were different. These were genuine. "I saw what I wrote online," she continued. "Someone sent me screenshots of what I posted, and I couldn't believe I'd said those things. I made you the villain when you were the one who'd been hurt. I twisted everything to make myself look better. And the worst part? I didn't even realize I was doing it until someone pointed it out. Until Maria commented on my post." Maria commented? Anne nodded. She didn't attack me, she just asked questions. Simple questions. Like, When was the last time I'd done something for you without expecting something in return? When was the last time I'd asked how you were doing and actually listened to the answer? And I couldn't answer them, Mom. I couldn't answer any of them, and I realized I didn't know you at all. I knew you as my mother, as the person who was always there, but I didn't know you as a person. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I don't deserve that. And I'm not asking you to come back and pretend everything's fine. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. I see what we did, what I did, and I hate myself for it. We sat in silence for a long moment. Outside, I could hear traffic, the distant wail of a siren, the normal sounds of Brooklyn on a Saturday, life continuing, indifferent to our small drama. I don't hate you, I said finally, but I also don't trust you. Anne flinched, but she nodded. That's fair. I spent my whole life trying to earn your love, trying to be enough, giving until there was nothing left. And I realize now that I was doing it wrong. I was teaching you that love could be bought, that I was only valuable for what I could provide. So you learned that lesson. You learned it well. I want to unlearn it, Anne said. I want to do better. I want to know you, not as my mother, as a person, as yourself. That will take time. I have time. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. She was 45 years old, with lines around her eyes and gray in her hair she covered with dye. When had she gotten so old? When had I? I'm meeting a friend in an hour, I said. I can't cancel on her. Anne's face fell slightly, then she caught herself. Of course. I shouldn't have just shown up. I should have called first. You should have, I agreed. But maybe. Maybe you could come back next week. For tea. Just tea. No promises beyond that. I'd like that, Anne said, and she meant it. I could tell. After she left, I sat for a while thinking. One apology didn't erase years of hurt. One conversation didn't rebuild trust. But it was a start. Maybe. Possibly. I wasn't sure yet. I met Maria at the park as planned. As we walked, I told her about Anne's visit. She listened without judgment, without telling me what I should do or feel. The question, she said finally, isn't whether you should forgive her. The question is what kind of relationship you want going forward, and whether she's capable of being the person you need her to be. I don't know the answer to that. You don't have to know yet. You have time to figure it out. Time. I was 72. How much time did I have? And did I want to spend it rebuilding bridges that had been burned or building new ones? I didn't have the answer. But for the first time, I was okay with that. I didn't need to have all the answers. I didn't need to fix everything. I just needed to keep moving forward, one step at a time. Anne did come back the following week. And the week after that, we had tea. We talked about small things, the weather, the neighborhood, a book she was reading. We didn't talk about the past or the future. Just the present. Just this moment. These conversations. Slowly, carefully, we began to build something new. It wasn't the relationship we'd had before. That was gone. Burned to ash in the fires of disappointment and neglect. But it was something. Anne started asking questions about my life, my painting class, my volunteer work at the library. She seemed genuinely interested in the answers. One afternoon, about 6 weeks into our weekly teas, Anne brought her youngest daughter Sophie with her. My granddaughter was 13, caught in that awkward space between childhood and adolescence. She sat quietly at first, sipping her tea with exaggerated care, clearly having been coached on good behavior. "Grandma," she said suddenly, "Mom says you're taking painting classes. Can I see your work?" I hesitated. My paintings were personal, private expressions of my journey. But Sophie's eyes were bright with genuine curiosity, and I found myself nodding. I brought out my current project, a watercolor of the Brooklyn Bridge at sunset. "It's beautiful," Sophie said, and I could tell she meant it. "Will you teach me?" And so I did. The following week, Sophie came alone, and we sat at my kitchen table with paints and brushes. I showed her how to mix colors, how to let the water guide the paint, how to embrace imperfection. We painted together in comfortable silence, broken occasionally by Sophie's questions or my gentle corrections. As I watched my granddaughter's face, furrowed in concentration, I realized something important. I was breaking a cycle. I was teaching Sophie that she had value beyond what she could do for others, that creativity and self-expression were worthy pursuits, that it was okay to take time for herself. I was teaching her things I'd only just learned myself. James didn't come. He called once, a brief conversation where he asked how I was, and I said fine, and we both pretended that was enough. He didn't apologize. I didn't expect him to. Some people aren't capable of that kind of self-reflection. Maybe he would be someday. Or maybe he wouldn't. Either way, it wasn't my responsibility to wait for it. Robert and I existed in a strange limbo. We lived in the same apartment but led separate lives. We were polite, civil, like roommates. He'd been so silent through everything, so passive, that I'd almost forgotten he was part of this family too. One evening, about 4 months after the confrontation, Robert came into the kitchen while I was painting. He stood in the doorway watching me work, his expression unreadable. "You seem different," he said finally. I didn't look up from my painting. "I am different." "Happier?" "Yes." He was quiet for a long moment. I should have said something. At Anne's house. Before that, even. I should have stood up for you. I set down my brush and looked at him. Really looked at him. This man I'd been married to for 44 years. This stranger I shared a life with. "Why didn't you?" I asked. He shrugged, a helpless gesture. "I don't know. It was easier not to, and I've always taken the easy way." At least he was honest. "I don't know if I can change," he continued. "I don't know if it's too late for us. But I want you to know that I see you now, and I'm sorry it took me this long." I nodded. "Thank you for saying that." We didn't embrace. We didn't make grand promises. But something shifted between us. A tiny crack in the wall we'd built over decades. Whether that crack would widen into a doorway or remain a small fissure, I didn't know. Time would tell. Sometimes I wondered if I should leave him, but at 72 the thought of starting over completely felt overwhelming. So we stayed in our strange detente, and I told myself that was okay for now. The painting class became my anchor. Every Tuesday evening, I sat with a dozen other people, mostly women, mostly older, all of us learning to see the world in new ways. My teacher, a young woman named Sarah with purple hair and kind eyes, never judged my clumsy attempts at art. She just encouraged me to keep trying, to experiment, to play. I painted flowers and buildings and abstract swirls of color. I painted my memories, the boardwalk at Coney Island, my mother's kitchen, the view from my apartment window. I painted my feelings, angry reds and peaceful blues and confused purples. I wasn't good. I didn't get better very quickly, but I enjoyed it. And enjoyment, I was learning, was enough. 6 months after walking out of Anne's house, I did something completely unexpected. I booked a trip. A real trip, not visiting family or checking on someone or fulfilling an obligation. A trip for me. I'd always wanted to see the Southwest, the red rocks and desert landscapes, so different from the crowded streets of Brooklyn. I'd collected pictures over the years, torn from magazines, saved on my phone, places I'd told myself I'd visit someday. I booked a 2-week guided tour. Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, hiking through canyons, staying in small hotels, seeing sunsets over landscapes that looked like paintings. It cost money. A significant amount. Money I would have once felt guilty spending on myself. But I had savings. I'd worked my whole life. I'd earned this. When I told Anne about the trip, I braced for resistance, for objections, for questions about whether I should really be traveling alone at my age. But she surprised me. "That sounds amazing," she said. "Can you send pictures? You don't think it's foolish? An old woman traveling alone?" "I think it's brave," she said. "And I think you deserve it." The trip was everything I'd hoped for and more. I hiked slowly, at my own pace, stopping to photograph petroglyphs and wildflowers. I ate dinner alone at small restaurants, reading books and watching the sunset. I made friends with other travelers, swapping stories and contact information I'd probably never use but appreciated anyway. I stood at the edge of the Grand Canyon and cried. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming beauty of it. The sheer scale of nature that made my problems feel small and manageable. I was one tiny person in an enormous world, and somehow that was comforting. I sent pictures to Anne and Maria and Mrs. Katz. I posted a few on social media, the first time I'd done that in months. The comments were overwhelmingly positive. Even people I hadn't spoken to in years reached out to say how happy I looked. And I was happy. Not perfectly, not completely. I still had hard days. I still missed the family I'd thought I had. But I was happy in a way I'd never been before. I was happy because I'd chosen this life, this freedom, this version of myself. When I came home, bronzed and tired and filled with stories, my apartment felt different. Smaller, but also more mine. I'd reclaimed it. I'd reclaimed myself. Now, almost a year since that Christmas Eve when James rolled his eyes and dismissed my gifts, I can sit in my living room and feel at peace. Anne and I have coffee every other week. We're rebuilding slowly, carefully, without rushing or forcing. Sometimes she brings her youngest daughter, my granddaughter Sophie, who's starting to ask me questions about my life, my past, who I am beyond grandma. I answer honestly. I tell her about the mistakes I made, the boundaries I should have set earlier, the importance of knowing your worth. James and I exchange occasional texts, polite updates, surface-level conversations. Maybe that's all we'll ever have. Or maybe someday he'll be ready for more. I'm not holding my breath either way. Mrs. Katz and I have become true friends. We take walks together, share meals, celebrate small victories. She taught me to play mahjong, and I taught her to paint. Neither of us is very good at the other's hobby, but we laugh about it, and laughter has become my favorite sound. Maria and I are planning a trip to Maine next fall. Just the two of us, renting a cottage by the ocean, reading and walking and being. I'm looking forward to it with the pure, uncomplicated joy of someone who knows she's earned this pleasure. I still paint every Tuesday. My work is slowly improving, though it will never be professional. But Sarah hung one of my pieces in the community center lobby, a simple watercolor of the Brooklyn Bridge at sunset. Beneath it, a small card reads my name. Just my name. Not mother, not wife, not grandmother, just me. I look at the photos on my mantle now. I've brought some back out, the ones that make me smile rather than ache. There's one of James and Anne as children, before everything got complicated. I can look at it now and remember the love without the pain. It's not easy, but it's possible. The sunset from my window paints the sky in shades of orange and pink. I pour myself a glass of wine, a nice one. Not the cheap kind I used to buy because I didn't think I deserved better. I sit on my couch and sip slowly, savoring the quiet. My suitcase sits by the door, packed for another trip. This one to Vermont, to see the fall leaves. I'm going alone again. By choice. Because I've learned that alone doesn't mean lonely. It can mean free. I think about the woman I was a year ago. Wrapping gifts with trembling hands, desperate for approval that would never come. I feel compassion for her. She was doing her best with the tools she had. But I don't want to be her anymore. And I'm not. The most important thing I've learned is this. Love shouldn't require you to disappear. Love shouldn't demand everything and give nothing back. Love shouldn't make you small. Real love, healthy love, reciprocal love, it lifts you up. It sees you. It values you for who you are, not what you can provide. I gave my children everything because I thought that's what mothers did. But I was wrong. What mothers should do, what all people should do, is teach others to stand on their own, to be whole, to love without taking. I taught dependence instead of independence. I taught transaction instead of connection. And when I finally stopped, when I finally set boundaries and demanded respect, they had to learn to stand on their own. Some did. Some didn't. That's not my responsibility anymore. I'm 72 years old. I don't know how many years I have left. 10? 20? 5? It doesn't matter. What matters is that however many days remain, I'll spend them being myself. Not a role, not a function. myself. The sky darkens. The stars come out, barely visible through the city lights, but there nonetheless. I finish my wine and wash the glass, a simple domestic act that feels different now. I'm not cleaning up after anyone. I'm caring for my space. There's a difference. Before bed, I open my journal and write a few lines. I started keeping a journal 6 months ago, documenting this journey of becoming. Tonight I write, I used to think family was everything. Now I know that self-respect is everything. Family can be part of that, or it can't. Either way, I'm going to be okay. I close the journal and turn off the light. Tomorrow I'll paint. I'll have coffee with Mrs. Katz. I'll call Maria to finalize our main plans. I'll live my life, this precious, hard-won, beautiful life. And if my children call, I'll answer. But I won't rearrange my plans. I won't sacrifice my peace. I won't diminish myself to make them comfortable. I'll simply be present, honestly, as much as I can be while still protecting the self I've worked so hard to find. This is my rebirth. This is my freedom. This is me, finally, after 72 years, learning to put on my own oxygen mask first. The lesson isn't complicated. You cannot pour from an empty cup. You cannot love others well if you don't love yourself. And you cannot be a complete person if you exist only in relation to others. It took me 7 decades to learn that. But I learned it. And now I get to live it. Have you lived something like this? Do you know someone whose love was taken for granted, whose sacrifices went unnoticed, who finally had to choose themselves? Share your story in the comments. Let's remind each other that it's never too late to reclaim your worth. And if this story touched you, if it made you think or feel or remember, please like this video and subscribe. Not for me. For the next person who needs to hear that they matter, that their life has value beyond what they give to others, that they deserve respect and love and peace. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Thank you for witnessing my journey from invisible to visible, from used to valued, from lost to found. My name is Eleanor, and I am enough.